Hello and welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. We don't give legal advice, but we do talk about how the law works and try to look into our crystal ball to see how things might turn out. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, we'd love it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, all the great YouTube-y stuff. And if you want to listen while out and about, we're now offering our live streams in podcast form where you can leave a rating and review. Links are in the description below, as well as to our clips channel where you can find some of the best clips taken from our live streams. Otherwise, if you want to catch me elsewhere, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Locals, Patreon, or by becoming a YouTube member, or by buying some really awesome Legalbytes merch. Again, all links are in the description below. And with that said, let's get into it.
All right, you guys, good afternoon in New Mexico. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I hope you had a good lunch. If you were with us in the morning, welcome back. If you are just popping in, welcome. So we are halfway through day 9. I did not do a midday poll. I'm going to start that as soon as we get the testimony started. But court, of course, instructed the jury to be there at 1:30 p.m. local time. It is now 2 p.m. local time. So don't know exactly what the delay was. It could have been any number of things, honestly. Like, maybe one of the jurors got delayed in coming back. Maybe, the parties wanted to have a bit more of an extensive sidebar on some other issue. Any number of things could have happened. However, we are currently with the defense expert witness on police investigation. What is it? Adequacy or whatever? Let's see here. What was it? What was it here? Police investigation quality. Okay, yeah. So basically the same thing. So he's on cross-examination. Miss Morrissey got to just start asking him a few questions. This is probably going to be a bit of a tough cross-examination on the witness, mostly because this is, he's an expert witness, and expert witnesses can go one way or another. Either they can come across looking very competent in a particular field and explain things in a way that otherwise would have been incredibly technical and difficult to understand. Or they can come across as basically a hired gun brought in to bring in a particular viewpoint or a particular conclusion. So anyway, so we'll see how this one turns out. But I will say that on direct examination, I did start to get the feeling that this was a little bit of a fluff piece of testimony in favor of the defense, which, hey, they're entitled to it. And hey, maybe this guy holds up well on cross-examination. We will see. We'll see. But now that they have had sustenance in their bellies, we are continuing with cross-examination. So let's get to it, shall we? As always, any kind of questions in the chat, I'll save and I'll bring them up on screen when there's a sidebar or another afternoon break or what have you. Or 15-minute recess, and answer those as we go along, and then of course we'll get caught up at some point on the stream. Okay, guys, let's begin, shall we?
All right, Mr. Elliott, I want to just back up for a brief moment, and I want to go back to any concerns you had about the projectile not matching the gun. I'm not sure that I fully understand what your concerns are in that regard. Would you articulate them for us again?
Yes, I was referring to the concerns that a detective would have upon arriving at scene. You don't have at the time, the results of lab testing. So, and you have nothing guaranteed.
What do you mean nothing guaranteed?
Well, at the time, you had some people saying this is the gun, but you didn't have any evidence, scientific evidence, showed that was the gun, which was later found to be true. I'm just talking about you have so many variables and so many unknowns that you can only use interviews on the scene to confirm and deny things. One person saying this is the gun, that may very well be the gun, but you have to see if someone else can verify that. Later on, you're going to have lab results, not at the time. And that's what I was referring to, is at the time, at the scene on October 21st.
So what's your concern then about the investigation that the Sheriff's Department did with regard to the gun? Is your testimony that after Ms. Gutierrez identified the gun to Lieutenant Benavides and handed him the gun, there should have been more follow-up with regard to whether or not that was really the gun? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because she's not the one that handed the gun to Mr. Baldwin. There are people in between that process. So
Continue, sir. I apologize.
Again, pieces of information come out as they're going through both processing the scene and interviewing people. And now we know that there is some time delay between the firearm being loaded, the firearm being on the cart, the firearm making it to Mr. Baldwin inside the church. And that's what I meant by the investigation at the time. A lot of information is coming out over months. Some information has come much later.
But you agree with me that Ms. Gutierrez handed Lieutenant Benavides the gun and said, this is the gun that was being used. And when she said that, she had been identified as the armor on the movie set. You agree with that?
I do.
And you also agree that, not surprisingly, that turned out to be the gun. You agree with that?
Oh, I do, yes.
So any potential issues with regard to that specific concern of yours didn't turn out to be issues. There's no issue. You agree with that? This is the gun that fired that projectile.
Correct, yes.
Okay. When we left off, there was an objection, and I'm going to go through with you. You were talking about the ammo boxes. I think that was where the objection was. So, as the investigator in this case, have you reviewed all of the body-worn camera footage?
I have. There's a lot.
So have I.
Yes.
I'm sympathetic to the exhausted look on your face. I'm going to show you what has been marked as what is already in evidence as State's Exhibit 192. Sir, have you seen this exhibit?
I have.
You agree with me that this is Lieutenant Benavides is pointing to the box that Ms. Gutierrez identified as the box that she was pulling ammunition from. Do you agree with that?
He is pointing to a box of ammunition, yes.
Are you indicating that you believe that the box here in this picture was not the box that she was pulling ammunition from?
No, I'm not. There were two boxes, and I don't know if it was clearly delineated to him which of the two boxes was where the ammo was drawn from.
Well, you understood that the gun was loaded with dummies, or was supposed to be loaded with dummies at the time of the incident, right?
Right.
And you also understand that this was the only box of dummies on the cart. You understand that, right?
Yes.
The other boxes were blanks, correct?
Correct.
And Ms. Gutierrez said to Lieutenant Benavides, this is the box I was pulling from, right?
Yes.
You don't think that Ms. Gutierrez meant to say I was pulling from a box of blanks when the gun was loaded with supposed dummies, do you?
No, I don't.
Okay. State's Exhibit 62. Have you seen this photo?
I probably have hundreds of photos of white boxes, but I can't
That
specifically say this photo.
does the box on the left, does that label look familiar to you in your investigation in this case?
It does.
So based on your investigation, do you have any reason to believe that the box that Ms. Gutierrez pointed out to Lieutenant Benavides is not this box that he took and placed in his unit?
I do not. And I believe that photo is taken in the unit, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I can see the seat.
State's Exhibit 63. You understand that this is a photo of that exact same box when it was taken into evidence at the sheriff's department, right?
Yes, that's how it's labeled, yes.
I'm not asking how it's labeled. You've reviewed the evidence at the evidence room, right?
Yes,
And you've reviewed all the photographs that were taken on scene.
yes.
Let me ask you, isn't it true that there was only one box found with this label? Isn't that correct?
That I don't know.
You're the defense investigator on this case, right?
Yes,
Have you seen photographs of a box that looks like this, but is loaded with something other than what this box was loaded with? Sir, do you have any reason to believe that there were two boxes with this label that were taken into evidence?
I do not know.
State's Exhibit 69. Have you seen this photo?
Again, I've seen dozens of photos. So.
Well, you're here to give an opinion about the investigation on this case. Are you not familiar with this photograph?
Specifically, no.
Okay. Did you watch the interview in November that Ms. Gutierrez gave to Detective Hancock?
I did.
And do you recall during that interview, Ms. Gutierrez holds up her phone and says, "This is a picture of our dummies," meaning the dummies that she would bring on the set. Do you recall that?
I do recall that, yes.
Isn't this the photo that she showed? You don't know?
Not at this point, no.
Okay. You weren't watching the testimony of our expert, Mr. Hawks, when he laid the foundation for this and indicated that this photograph was sent from a contact in her phone named Dadkula to her the day before the interview with Detective Hancock. Were you not aware of that?
I was not, no.
So, sir, based on Ms. Gutierrez's statements, would it be her own statements to law enforcement, would it be reasonable for law enforcement to believe that State's Exhibit 62, this box here in the foreground, is indeed the box she was pulling from because she said that? Wouldn't that be reasonable for law enforcement to believe that?
Yes, it would.
And you understand that that box was determined to have a live round.
Yes.
And you agree with me that that box that had the live round matches this photo that was shown to Detective Hancock during the November 9th interview. You understand that?
Yes, I do.
Sir, do you still have questions and concerns about how the live rounds got on set?
I do.
You don't think that law enforcement can simply take Ms. Gutierrez's word for it, that this is her box and this is the one she was pulling from and this is the one where live rounds were found?
Yes, but what we don't know is how many times those boxes were unloaded and reloaded. Every time that one of the firearms were loaded with dummy rounds, they came out of a box. They didn't necessarily go back into the same box.
Do you agree with me, sir, that there are certain things in homicide investigations that just simply can't be controlled for? You agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Really quick, let me answer a couple questions here. Ashley Maynard wants to know, why would she ask him if he'd watched her witnesses? Expert witnesses are allowed to observe the testimony of all of the other witnesses, unlike lay witnesses. This is why it's so important for someone to be designated as an expert or to be considered as the default, which is a lay witness. So like I said, expert witnesses, they can prepare reports, they can look at all of the evidence in the case, they can look at the other experts' reports and comment on those, they can see the other people testify and come back. And so there's kind of an expectation that they do that actually, so that they can draw a proper opinion based on all of the information available. So that's why she's asking about that. And that's why it's yeah, that's why she's asking him. And then also really quick, Vulcan Breeze, will it be the same prosecutor in the Baldwin trial? Yes. It's expected to be the same special prosecutor team here, both her and Lewis, her co-counsel.
Sir, what's the smallest police department you've ever worked for?
Albuquerque PD.
You agree with me that the Albuquerque Police Department is approximately 10 times the size of the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Department with regard to the number of commissioned officers?
I am. I think Albuquerque is around 850, and I think Santa Fe is 120, 130, something like that.
Okay. More than 8 times.
Right.
You agree with that math?
I do.
Have you ever worked on a homicide investigation on a movie set?
I have not.
Do you agree with me that normally in homicide investigations, police aren't concerned with where the live ammo came from? This case is unique in that regard, isn't it?
This case is unique from the beginning, yes.
Okay, it is,
Yes.
right? It's unique from the beginning. So police officers, you would agree, are not trained in how to investigate homicides on movie sets where they're not supposed to have live rounds, they're supposed to have fake rounds. Cops aren't trained in that, right?
Specifically, no.
Okay. And you agree with me, don't you, that Lieutenant Benavidez can't just let Ms. Gutierrez walk around the movie set with a firearm that appears to have just shot 2 people. You agree with that?
Oh, I do agree with that with reference to firearm, yes.
Yeah. It was incumbent on Lieutenant Benavidez to remove that firearm from her possession, correct?
From anyone's possession, yes.
And you just take issue with the fact that he didn't put a glove on before he did it.
Basically, yes.
But you agree that the fact that he didn't put a glove on didn't turn out to create any significant evidentiary issues in this case, because everybody knew who was holding the gun and everybody knew who shot the gun. You agree with that?
I do.
And sir, you also agree with me, don't you, that a police officer's first responsibility is to save human lives, not collect evidence?
Correct, as I stated, yes.
And do you recall that Ms. Gutierrez was actually checked by EMTs when she was sitting in the back of Lieutenant Benavidez's patrol unit?
Yes, I did see that.
And you agree that she was allowed to make phone calls?
Yes, she was.
I think you indicated that you talked a little bit about that Detective Hancock sort of took possession of Ms. Gutierrez. Do you recall the statement that you made in that regard?
I do.
So I want to ask you, and one of the examples you gave was that Detective Hancock even accompanied Ms. Gutierrez to the restroom, right?
Yes, she did.
But in watching the body-worn camera footage, isn't it true that Sergeant Christopher Zook tells Detective Hancock, she doesn't want to go to the bathroom alone. Will you take her to the bathroom? Ms. Gutierrez actually asks to be accompanied to the bathroom. Do you recall that?
I do.
And do you agree with me that it was Ms. Gutierrez who asked to be placed in Detective Hancock's patrol unit? That wasn't something that the police just unilaterally did with her.
No, she did. She did ask.
Is there a problem with them granting her request that she be accompanied to the bathroom?
No, but I didn't think that included going into the bathroom with her. Can I elaborate?
Sure.
I believe she stated something along the lines of she didn't want to talk to anyone from production. So it was kind of like if she was with Detective Hancock, she wouldn't be approached by any of her coworkers. I think that was her intention of being escorted. But I didn't think it included going into the bathroom itself.
Well, she went into the bathroom and she had her back turned to Ms. Gutierrez. What's the big deal? Ms. Gutierrez asked for an escort. How did that hurt the investigation?
Hurt the investigation?
Yeah.
It did not.
Now, Ms. Gutierrez stayed on set and she was sitting in a police car with the door open, and there was a coworker of hers sitting in there visiting with her. You agree with that?
Yes, I do.
And she had her phone. You agree with that?
Yes,
She was allowed to make phone calls.
yes,
She was never placed in handcuffs. You agree with that?
correct.
So what's problematic about that? How was she mistreated by police?
I didn't say she was mistreated. It was every appearance of not being free to leave. I based that on the fact that when Lieutenant Benavidez would step away from his vehicle, he would tell a deputy to keep an eye on her. If she's free to leave and she's just sitting in the back of the unit with an open door, she should be allowed to walk away if she wanted to. It gives the impression that she is in custody when you're not free from constant observation from law enforcement.
Well, but isn't it true that she seemed to be having a panic attack, and it was appropriate for Lieutenant Benavidez, when he walked away, to ask another officer to keep an eye on her, to make sure she's okay? Isn't that true?
At that time, she appeared fine.
Did she? Is that a yes?
That's a yes.
So was it your expectation that Mr. Baldwin should have been detained? Do you believe that they should have detained him?
I do.
And do you believe that they should have put him in a police car and taken his phone away?
Not necessarily placed in a police car, but he should have been segregated from the other witnesses, and his phone should have been taken to preserve evidence.
don't you agree with me that there has to be probable cause that there may be evidence on the phone before the phone can be taken?
But they wouldn't know if there was going to be evidence on the phone without interviewing him. There was no other way to know whether there was evidence on that phone or not. But he was on the phone when law enforcement arrived. So who was he talking to?
Well, did you look at his call logs?
That's after the fact. I'm talking about when deputies arrived at the scene.
Okay, I appreciate that. But what I'm trying to figure out is what about your concerns actually turned out to be real issues with the investigation? What evidence was missing or hidden by Mr. Baldwin? What evidence do you have?
We don't have the full contents of his phone.
Has the defense filed any kind of a motion in this case to try to get the full contents of his phone?
That I don't know.
And you understand, though, that a full extraction of Mr. Baldwin's phone was done in New York, but we were given a limited report. You understand that?
Yes, I do.
And you also understand that originally the same thing happened with Ms. Gutierrez. A limited report was generated from a full extraction, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you agree with me that defense counsel is free to issue subpoenas and file motions to compel and do all of those things in a case if they feel that they're missing evidence?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
So do you think that it would have been appropriate then for law enforcement to take Ms. Gutierrez's phone away from her and not let her make a phone call to her mother?
That can be monitored also. I've seen it done both ways. I've seen them taken away where they're not allowed to make any phone calls, and I've also seen where they've been able to make a call in the presence of law enforcement.
Sir, generally in your experience as a law enforcement officer, do you usually continue to investigate an individual for a crime after you have, let's say for months, after you have been unable to develop a single lead that that person was involved? Do you need me to rephrase that question?
I think I understand your question. You're saying, do you continue an investigation of someone that you have no information?
Yeah, right. You executed a search warrant, you interviewed the person numerous times, and you just simply don't have any evidence that they were involved. At some point, don't they just not become a suspect anymore?
I don't know if that's the correct phrase, but your investigation is over. You've taken the investigation as far as you can go.
Right.
Right.
So at some point with Mr. Kinney, they executed a search warrant, they interviewed him numerous times, and they didn't come up with anything. So what do you think they should have done to continue?
At that point, there wasn't much further they could go.
And sir, are you aware
That's not
that
good for the defense.
The FBI will not do DNA testing on rounds, whether they're spent or unspent? Were you aware of that?
I heard about it in this case, but they have done DNA testing on casings, unspent casings.
Well, weren't you present? Were you present for a pretrial interview of the DNA expert in this case?
I was.
And you heard her during the interview state that they won't do this kind of DNA testing, correct?
I did.
All right. And you agree with me, sir, that police officers, when they arrived on scene, they knew immediately who the shooter was?
I think that information arrived shortly after the first deputies arrived, but it was before the lieutenant arrived. There's a little lag there, but not much time at all.
Okay, and Mr. Baldwin didn't leave the scene, did he?
He did not.
You testified on direct examination that there was a person who left the scene that was never identified. Do you recall making that statement?
I did, and that was based on what came out of some of the interviews. I don't quite recall. I think the lieutenant asked if we had everybody. And
What lieutenant are you talking
Lieutenant
about?
Benavides.
Okay.
And one of the deputies responded with one left. And I think he asked who that was, and the deputy didn't know.
But you know, don't you? Because you interviewed him and you asked him. Didn't you interview Reed Russell? And when you interviewed Reed Russell, he told you that he left so that he could go to the hospital to be with his close friends. And before he left, he gave all of his contact information to the police. You interviewed him. Do you recall that?
I did.
Do you need to see a copy of the interview?
I don't.
And you also understand that Mr. Russell, who left the scene to go to the hospital, was interviewed the very next day by Detective Cano. Aren't you aware of that?
I am, yes.
So what's the mystery? Who's the mystery man that left the set? He was identified, right? Correct?
Mr. Russell was identified, but I was never quite clear if it was the same individual.
Even though you asked him and he said, I'm the guy that left the set to go to the hospital?
Yes, but did he know he was the only one who left?
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. I'll pass the witness.
I think that cross went a little bit longer than it needed to, but she did draw out some important points. I mean,
Elliott.
to include when she got him to say, yeah, I mean, basically there was nothing left to investigate as to Seth Kenney. He agreed on that, which is like that coming from the defense. Not good for their case, coming right from their expert.
You're aware from all your experience in law enforcement that it is the government's burden to prove in any criminal case, correct? And that burden never shifts to the defendant.
That's correct, yes.
So when you were asked earlier about why the defense didn't file motions and do subpoenas, isn't that law enforcement and the government's job to prove their case?
Objection.
Yeah, he's talking about a legal standard there. All right.
Mr. Elliott, do you recall that question?
I do.
Okay, and is it always the government's burden to prove their case, to prove in a criminal case?
It is.
Okay. Now, if law enforcement doesn't timely and appropriately obtain evidence, does that sometimes impact an entire investigation?
It can.
For example, in your experience as a homicide detective and working in civilian and military law enforcement, if you delay a search warrant for a month, can that materially impact a case?
It can.
And in your experience, have you seen times when there's been that kind of delay where evidence goes missing?
I have.
You talked earlier about the FBI and other cases you had been aware of where they had obtained DNA. You did not expand on that. Have you been aware of other cases in which the FBI has searched for DNA on casings?
The Las Vegas shooting.
So based on that answer, is it your understanding they do have the capacity, the ability to do that?
They do have the ability, yes.
Earlier, you were asked a series of questions about, I'm going to categorize them as no harm, no foul. In other words, we know in hindsight now that certain things didn't happen. But in any case, homicide investigation, would you always want to start out assuming that anything can go wrong and to properly preserve that evidence?
Yes, of course.
For example, with regard to the firearm, when you testified about Lieutenant Benavides touching that firearm, would there be scenarios, not like it played out here, but where somebody else turned out to be the shooter, for example, and that firearm, it was important to know the fingerprints?
Well, of course, this investigation started with a 911 call. They are not always accurate.
And so I guess my question to you is, in your experience and your training and 13 years as homicide, were you taught and trained to preserve evidence and to take those appropriate steps in every single case?
Yes.
We were asked earlier a series of questions about Ms. Gutierrez-Reed and whether she was there voluntarily or the appearance of being detained. Did the sheriffs drive Ms. Gutierrez-Reed to the sheriff's office?
Yes, they did.
Did they drive Mr. Baldwin to the sheriff's office?
No, he drove himself and followed a deputy.
Okay. From the time that Ms. Gutierrez-Reed was in the vehicle on the set to the time of the interview, did you ever notice any period of time when she was not in law enforcement presence?
I did not.
With regard to the questions about items and boxes on the prop card that you were asked, the 2 boxes, is it clear to you from reading the reports, everything that you reviewed in this case, what items Sarah and the other 2 individuals may have removed from the prop card and taken to the prop truck?
No, it is not clear to me.
And based on your entire review of the whole case, has there ever been any follow-up or any information you've received that would have clarified that, what they took from the prop card?
No, a vague, couple long guns. I think 2 revolvers. I do know who they came from, and other items that I don't know of.
One last question. If law enforcement delays, if they do not conduct a full investigation, it's possible for the defense to lose out on evidence that may have been exculpatory?
Yes, there is.
I have no further questions.
You're excused, thank you. Next witness.
Your Honor, we call Frank Kuski.
Okay. All right, let's get some questions here. Harry Funmaker, what do they do if one side objects to a person as an expert? Well, they go through a whole argument after they have gone through the steps of qualifying them as an expert. So there's a whole list of questions that they've got to go through about their experience, their experience, expertise, their education, background, etc. Like what really qualifies them as an expert. And if the other side has objections about it, they've got to basically go through like what those objections are and all that kind of stuff. But this would all be a sidebar. In a case like this, however, well, in a lot of cases, most cases, I would actually say these experts are all figured out ahead of time. They've argued them, they've kind of gone through them, they know what to expect. And so it makes things a lot smoother actually at trial, that you don't have to get bogged down in these arguments where you have to like let the jury out and et cetera, et cetera. So, anyway, that's basically what happens. Ange, before an expert is qualified as an expert on the day of the trial. Oh, let's see. Since an expert has to be qualified as such by the court, can they watch testimonies before the court says, yeah, we'll consider you an expert on the stand? I mean, yeah, usually someone like the person that we just saw, he wasn't there for any of the events. You know, he doesn't have any personal knowledge of any of this stuff. He has knowledge of what happened in the case because of his work as an expert witness. So most likely he just wouldn't testify if he couldn't be qualified as a witness. And also some questions about leading. Remember, this was cross-examination that Morrissey was doing. So cross-examination, you are allowed and encouraged to ask leading questions, because it's assumed that this witness is not friendly to your case. So leading questions is, generally speaking, going to be easier, but also just overall better to actually be able to get any kind of information out of them. Jeff Postman, pretty effective cross overall. She basically gets to retell the state's narrative of events all over again. And this is ultimately like the beauty of a good cross examination, right? Because even though the defense case in chief just started today, they have been able to, or they've at least had opportunities to reassert their narrative throughout trial, throughout the state's case in chief, through cross-examination. And that's the beauty of it is, you can and should ask leading questions, so you can basically use the witness as a puppet to basically talk about the things that you want to talk about, and you're just asking it in a question and answer format, yes no question and answer format. And if you can get it at a good clip, you can get all of the focus on you and what you're saying. They're just affirming it, right? Jerry Roth wants to know, why does Carrie seem so pissed off? That's just kind of her style. But I think also there's a little bit of trial theatrics at play here too, that she is, putting on this sort of incredulous persona with that particular witness. I mean, some of the stuff, if you're coming from her perspective, of course, what he's saying is ridiculous and is overblown, and it's incredibly biased and improperly so. But that also is kind of her style. She has a tendency to get to that zone pretty quickly. All right. And then, Link Journey, what are your thoughts on this witness, Legalbytes? I'm not gonna lie. Even from the outset, he kind of had this sense of, like, as opposed to somebody who is genuinely bringing their expertise, like he was there to give the talking points of the defense side. So yeah, by all definitions, a hired gun. Yes, every expert technically is a hired gun, but there are experts who are going to say what they think regardless, and then whether you decide to work with them or not is on you. And so them being actually hired by one side to be an expert witness doesn't necessarily change their opinion, because they've got their professional reputation to uphold. And then there are those who have a particular viewpoint, and they've put that on, and that's where they decide to go with it. So this he had, to me, he struck me as kind of a bit more of the latter. And I say that with all respect to him, and all of his experience and all that kind of stuff, as well. And then also a non 436. Do you have any tips on selecting competent defense if you find yourself in this position? Is it purely a budget issue? What's a defense like this cost? I mean, there are public defenders who do great work as well. Public defenders are assigned to a case, and they don't. You, it's for people who are indigent, so they don't. Um, so they don't charge for their services. Their services are paid by the county or by the state. And so, I mean, partially a budget issue, sure, but if you're going to be hiring a defense attorney like this, it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, it can skyrocket pretty quickly for any kind of a trial. Baldwin, as an example, is probably going to be spending, at a minimum, multiple six figures. That's at a true minimum. It's probably much more than that, more like seven figures, or perhaps more. So selecting competent defense, that's such a hard thing to do, because part of it is are they communicating things to you effectively? Are you understanding the process effectively? There are some attorneys, there have been some times when I have sort of talked with someone who's a Okay, sorry about that. I don't know why I just got booted, but I'm back. Okay. So what I was saying is, it's kind of a difficult thing to um okay. It's kind of a difficult thing to gauge how sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once to get the picture back up. Um to gauge like a good attorney, but someone who is going to educate you on the process is important. Someone who's going to have good communication with you, but also someone who has experience in the area. I think that's the big issue here with Bowles, is that although he has a lot of um although he has a lot of maybe litigation experience, he doesn't seem to have any criminal experience from what I've been told, which is an issue here. It definitely is an issue here. Okay, let's continue on with the testimony, and thank you so much for your questions.
Stand before the judge, raise your right hand.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, have a seat talking to the microphone. Thank you.
Okay, sir, good afternoon. Can you please tell the jury your name again?
Frank Lewis Blair Kuski III,
Nope.
Where do you currently reside?
Carmel Valley,
We're not gonna-
California.
And what do you do for a living,
Spelling?
sir?
I'm managing director of Blair Financial Group, money managers.
I want you, outside of your management in Blair Financial, to tell the jury about your experience with period firearms.
Yes,
He's going to be another.
prior to, let me check a note to make sure dates are correct. I took part in my first movies in this, which were done with,
And I'm not talking about the movies. Let me just,
I'm sorry, okay.
yeah, let me just try to center my question. Yeah.
I'm still checking.
Okay,
Okay, so he's just getting into his own background here. He's going to be tendered as an expert. Yeah, so he's going to be tendered as an expert, and I didn't quite catch what the issue was with his testimony so far. It sounded like maybe he was trying to jump into this particular case. I mean, as for the tie, I don't know. Maybe he went to the University of Michigan, and he's as proud as Rick Hogue is for his Michigan time. So I don't know. It's okay in terms of the courtroom fashion. I don't absolutely hate it. Some people might, but
okay, Mr. Kuski, if I can just direct that a little more. I want to go just give the jury an overview of your experience with firearms, and not necessarily getting into movies yet, but your experience with firearms and period firearms and how you obtain that familiarity.
Do you wish for the long explanation or the short?
No, the short. The short's
right.
always better.
My father was a combat MP in the Second World War. I was shooting almost from birth. I was sent to rifle camp in Butte, Montana at age 6, which is hard to imagine. I grew up around a hunting family. My grandfather was a big-time hunter. I grew up hunting deer and pheasants with my uncle in the forests of Ohio. I had Ohio and Indiana and Pennsylvania hunting licenses ever since they were required. I was a member, I was a Boy Scout riflery merit badge winner. I worked, was a member of the Kenyon College of Rifle Team. Following graduation from Kenyon College, I took up firearms in a very serious way, beginning collecting and shooting. I was trained by Louis Tenenbaum, essentially right out of college, who's a member of the U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit, who thought I was worth taking his time with that. I appeared in a number of little television shorts and things like that through that time period. And when I really got going on primitive firearms, and I won't even talk about self-defensive guns at this point, I was trained in combat guns. I first appeared in the George Washington television miniseries in 1984, and I was assigned my role as a surveyor in the wilderness. And of course, I had my first real flintlock in my hands at that time. During the earlier times, had shot a lot of primitive weapons, primarily flintlocks. Black powder stuff. Was very interested in that. After that, I got going and I joined a group called the First American Regiment in 1985, which was the premier late 18th century, early 19th century reenactors for military reenactment. And during this time, and I believe you have a nice picture of me firing cannons, I became a sergeant of artillery doing reenactment big time. And in that capacity, I appeared in lots of movies. I fired artillery. This is 18th century artillery. I fired the 1812 Overture with Cincinnati Symphony in various performances in big stadiums and things. I also, sorry for the cough, I also answered questions for NBC Nightline fairly routinely on weapons identification because, of course, I'm fairly good expert in Russian weapons and one of the largest collectors in the United States. I took part with First American Regiment in many different film productions, television productions, that sort of thing, which were done by PBS and I believe the History Network. These were shown at the time on television and also became educational movies, programs. They sold the rights to us, charging with bayonets to all kinds of ad agencies.
Okay, let me stop you for a second, because there's a lot of information. And,
well, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. But I wanted to ask you, in the course of that, and you've had a whole lifetime, is that fair to say?
Yes, it is.
Of gun. Have you been a collector also of period type weapons?
Yes, very much so.
Okay. Are you familiar with the revolver in this case, the 45 long Colt?
Absolutely.
Did you bring with you today that revolver? Not that revolver, but a revolver just like that revolver?
Yes, we would call it a sister. It is made by Pieta, the same exact company with nearly sequential serial numbers. It is absolutely identical. Any part would interchange and it will look exactly like the Baldwin gun.
Did you also bring a replica gun with
Yes, I did.
And can you tell the jury just first of all what
Sure.
that is?
This is a Denex replica. Denex is a company in Spain that makes replicas of anything from shotguns to antique weapons to swords, things like that. They're used by reenactors. They're used in movies. There was a Denex revolver on the set of Rust that was used as one of the dummy guns. There were, in fact, 10 non-firing replica guns on the set that looked like this. So it can't shoot, but it looks like it. It functions. It cocks. The cylinder turns, and from 5 feet away, you couldn't tell unless you really looked.
Okay, sir. Let me, if I can. Yes, I was going to
I can
ask
get a
at
word
this
in
time, Your
edgewise.
Honor, if I could tender him as an expert in the categories I previously did.
Well, why don't you state them on the record again?
I was making sure I had the exact wording. Is that okay if you wrote those down? Because I don't want to change it. Well, I'll just say
That's your job,
again, it's firearm identification, firearm functioning, reloading of ammunition, and identification of ammunition, of dummy rounds and live rounds.
Any objection?
No objection within the confines of what we discussed at the bench.
All right, thank you.
Yes, I understand. So,
Okay.
Sir, if you will, I'm sorry.
For these specific areas, subject to the ruling up at the bench. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. Sir, if you will, if you could, however the deputy handles this, but if you could retrieve the firearms from behind you.
Do it in public, and I will clarify that it is not loaded. Okay. The first is a real.
Mr. Kuski, are you able to take the cylinder out so you can show everyone also that it's unloaded?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
There's something important. And here is a Denex revolver.
So, Your Honor, I'm going to object.
All
Uh-oh.
right, first of all, everybody's nervous. because you have not demonstrated to us that they are unloaded. So before you start showing us the
Oh
weapons,
no.
make sure they're unloaded,
Oh
including that one
no.
that you just touched.
Oh God. Oh, that's so disastrous because that's like, oh no. Oh Jesus. Oh Jesus. Not pointing it down while he's checking it. Oh my God. This is like a representation of like Hannah in general. This is her expert. This is the expert who's supposed to like counteract Carpenter, the armorer expert from the state. And the judge just like reprimanded him in front of the jury, in front of everyone, talking about how he's making everybody nervous on safety. This is, oh God, this is such a horrible way to start. Well, the second one, he's holding the barrel down, but the first, the court officer, the bailiff had to like point the barrel down because it was like pointed directly at the judge. Oh no, what a rocky start. The like visuals on all kinds of things can matter. Like subtle visuals can matter. But this right here, he starts off looking a bit incompetent. And like he's just kind of bumbling around on safety of a firearm. Oh no. Yeah, the video is muted because they're still having a sidebar because there was also even before that, that horrible moment. The state objected. There was something on. So what happened is the this particular expert, they had some sort of an argument as to probably the scope of his testimony, the scope of his expertise. I don't know, something along those lines. And so they ended up setting some rules as to how far he can go on certain things. And so something that he said or something in the question that was just asked of him probably ran afoul of that, or there was a concern that it was going to run afoul of it. Oh my God. It's so bad. That was bad. So yeah, and Vertice Griffith, I'm not making fun of him. I'm just saying like these kinds of visuals matter. The things that people do, the things that the attorneys do, that the witnesses do, that the parties do in the courtroom in front of the jury, they leave an impression on the jury. And if the judge has reprimanded him because she says
Okay.
that he has made everyone in the courtroom feel unsafe, that's a big problem. Big problem. And he seems like a very nice man. So I'm not gonna make fun of him or anything, but like that was a really, really bad start.
Kizzy, I want to make sure that, first of all, the Denix is the replica that's non-firing. That is obviously clear. It cannot fire, correct?
Yes, I wish to demonstrate.
Okay, but and just let me lead the questions.
Sure.
The other Pieta, you cleared with the deputy, but I want you to be able to take that cylinder out so we can show everyone it's clear. Is that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Gun is pointed in a safe direction. Now, if we can get this pin out, the cylinder is retained. Cylinder is retained by a pin. Once that pin is removed, the gun may be put in a partially cocked position. The cylinder may be pushed out, and again, the barrel's safe. You can look right straight through it. Sir, would you take that and show them all? It's empty. Is that acceptable?
It's up to the court.
No.
Yes. Okay.
No, the deputy is not involved in this case.
Okay. And so
It is empty. I demonstrated it's empty.
okay. Okay,
May I return it to the
Yes.
firearm?
okay, so now the first thing I want to ask you, comparing the Denix, the replica, to the real, the Pieta, do they share some of the same characteristics?
Yes, they do.
And can you tell the jury, is the Denix made to look like the Pieta?
Absolutely.
And side by side, if you can, and Your Honor, may he step down to show the jury?
Yes.
Sir, if you can show them the Pieta and the Denix side by side, just so they can see.
This is a Denix. It is a replica, totally unfiring with a block barrel.
Okay.
It functions completely.
So that makes me feel a little bit better about what just happened, because that was the one that he showed to the like waved in the air at the jury and then like pointed at the judge unwittingly as he was opening it. But the problem is he knew it was a Denix. He knew that it was blocked, but no one else knew that. Like that hadn't been established yet, that is impossible for it to fire a round. So you've still got to go through that step of and this is like the jury now has the actual feeling of having been on, like what it must feel like to be on set with firearms present when you don't know if that's been properly checked, and oh my god, what happens if it has a round in it and it goes off. It's like like they now feel that in their bodies, right? I mean, I'm of course assuming somewhat, but like there's a good chance that they may be feeling that in their bodies. That's bad for the defense. That's really bad for the defense.
Like a regular revolver, the cylinder turns, it will cock, it will snap and fire. It's unable to fire any ammunition. It's used as a replica. It's made of metal, and it functions just like a single action Army Colt, but it can't fire. I'll bring the next one, and then we'll compare them. Next gun in the same position. This is a Pieta revolver. This is the sister gun to the Baldwin gun. It's a .45 caliber single action 1873 revolver, like was issued to Custer's troops. It is a true .45 long Colt. We call it just Colt. And it was designed for the U.S. Army to be able to kill a man and a horse. And it was the most popular firearm in Western movies.
Thank you, Mr. Kuski. If you could.
Now may I show the two together?
Yes, if you will just show what, but not
He's a
without,
hard witness to keep
not with
control of.
testimony, but just showing them.
I'll reverse them.
Mr. Kuski, in your review as an expert in this case, are you aware whether there was a Denix revolver like that on set on Rust?
Yes, there is. It was covered in the invoices as rented by Rust Management.
Now, not demonstrating at this point, but can you tell the jury, based on what you just showed them on the Pieta, how you safely decock that firearm when you get it cocked?
You wished me to pick up the gun and show how it is decocked? I would prefer first showing on a Denix to them,
Yes.
and then on a live
Just
one.
show,
You're
don't,
not gonna object to any approach?
This witness is difficult to control. He kind of he's got this vibe where it's like he wants to tell the things that he wants to tell, regardless of whether there's a question that he needs to answer, and just answer the damn question. So let's fast forward a bit here.
Okay, Mr. Kuski, if you will, using the Denix, the replica, demonstrate that the cocking and proper decocking of that weapon.
Yes. This is one of the primary things that an individual must be trained in to safely cock and decock a Colt revolver or a replica. Now, first, the finger has to stay off of the trigger and outside of the trigger guard, no matter what. That's the essential rule of safety. The firearm is cocked with your thumb, you see. Finger's still outside of the trigger. No one touches any trigger. This is now a gun capable of being fired. Now, the first thing I do here is put my thumb on top of it. If I'm not real strong, I put two thumbs on. Notice my finger is still completely off the trigger. I then slowly, gently pull the trigger and lower the hammer onto the cartridge. I then back it up to its safe position. Now I will demonstrate the same thing exactly with the real Pieta revolver. Okay, we have Pieta safely aimed. My finger is off the trigger. You can see this is where it has to stay. If your finger's in there, you can't decock safely. Now, again, we cock 1, 2, 3, 4. C-O-L-T, the clicks. This is a cocked, ready to fire revolver if it were loaded. My finger must stay out of the trigger guard and on the side. Now, I put my finger in, but I don't put it in until I put my thumb here. Even putting it in before, like that, would cause it to fire perhaps. Now, I'm holding the hammer back. I can feel the spring. Everything's safe. Now my finger goes on the trigger, pulls the trigger, slowly lowers to a safe position without snapping, and then pulls back to the safety notch, which removes the firing pin from the cartridge. Notice my finger's out of there again, not that the gun is cocked. And that's the only decocking. A guy doing this experience can do it with his thumb because this is all knurled here, so it can't slip. Fingers out of there. I decock safely.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for demonstrating that. And I wanted to ask you with regard to that operation, in this particular case, we're dealing with a movie set, obviously.
Yes.
Do the general rules of firearm safety, including the demonstration you just did, do they apply equally on movie sets?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, in your work as an expert in this case, reviewing all the information, did you agree with Mr. Haig's conclusion regarding violation of some of those safety rules?
Absolutely.
Now, I want to ask you, I want to switch topics. I want to ask you about reloading. There's been some testimony about an inertia puller.
Yes.
And if you could tell the jury what an inertia puller is.
An inertia puller is basically a type of hammer that pulls bullets out of loaded cartridges when you have a misfire or you wish to disassemble old ammo. Basically, it has a plastic head about this big. It has a handle on it like a hammer that costs about $12. You put the cartridge, which could be any kind of cartridge, old dead cartridges, whatever you got, and you put it in, clamp it down with a little device, close the thing up. There'll be an empty space underneath, and there'll be a ring here holding the cartridge in metal, and you bang it on a table, and the bullet is pulled out. That the bullet, remember, is the lead part, not the case. And the bullet will fall out. If there's powder, that will fall out as well. You then get a bullet, ka-ching. You have powder, which you can pour out, and you have a case, which may or may not be live primed, or, you know, maybe a good primer, maybe a rechargeable case, maybe anything that happens to be there.
Okay, so Mr. Kuski, if you wanted to reload a round, let's say you want to convert a dummy round to a live round, what are the steps in the reloading process?
Well, this is really extremely technically difficult. And the way it begins is you have to have, suppose it is a dummy. This is a beat up old piece of old brass that happens to have a dummy bullet in it. It has a dead primer in it. So what you start is you pop out the bullet. You see there's no powder. Now you turn over the case, put the bullet aside. The case is filthy. The case is all grody and nasty from sitting around. It has to go in a machine called a tumbler. Every reloader worth his salt has a tumbler. It's about this big. Sometimes it's a ball, sometimes it's a drum. It's filled with generally powdered walnut, and it's got a motor, and it spins and spins and spins as a polishing machine. And at the end of that time, you come out with brass that looks somewhat better than it started because it's knocked off some of the crud. You then wipe that down smooth. You then have to have a tool which is called a reloading press. I have a photograph, if you wish to see, of a reloading press. Would that be acceptable?
We can actually, if you can finish.
Well, let's
showing
go
the
finish.
process, yeah.
You then have a reloading press. The reloading press, as one of its functions, is to get that old dead primer out. Remember, the primer is in the little hole in the bottom of the brass you're holding. This press has a big lever. It has a special pin designed for that cartridge to remove the primer, because if it went the other direction, you'd bang the cartridge up. But there's one more tool you must have, and that's called a shell carrier or a little shell holder. And that's sized exactly for the diameter of the rim of the cartridge you're going to take apart. So 45 couldn't take a 380 or something like that. Has to be a 45. Slide in that so it holds it's completely solid. Put this in your press, line it up over the top and pull. And when you pull, that pin will drive out the primer. It changed. Now you've got a case with no primer in it. It's shined up as best as your material can do. Now we get to the good part. You have to put a new primer in. First, you have to have a new primer, and they're very, very hard to get in much of the markets because they've been just grabbed up. So you take this tiny little primer, you put it in a tool called a priming tool. This may be part of your press, or it may be an independent machine. And this will hold the primer safely. Again, it has to be for your cartridge. You have to put that little shell holder in. You put the shell, which is empty, the empty case, slide it into the holder, pull the lever, and the primer, which is quite explosive, is pressed carefully flat up into the exact right position. And if you didn't have the shell holder and all the right gear, you couldn't do it. The primer would blow up the minute it was hit, but it's safe this way. Now you've got a case, and that case is certain to get to be a live case. And it would be called a live case. It has a live primer, nice shiny case. You then put that in your press and go to the next stage. I have the press. You stick it in that ever-present shell holder again. It holds it perfectly, immaculately straight. You then have on your press something called a sizing die. The sizing die costs about $55, fits in presses. You adjust that properly, which takes some skill, and you pull. The sizing die goes right over the top of the case and makes it the right size, because an old dummy isn't the right size. It'd jam up in your gun, wouldn't take a bullet, piece of junk. Once it's sized, there's a little ball inside, pulls it up, and that very neatly expands the top of the case. And without that expansion, you can't put a new bullet in. So now we've got a nice expanded case with a nice live primer in it. Looks pretty darn good. It's all sized to the right size. The mouth is expanded. Now you got to have a powder measure, and you have to have the right powder. You can't just use any old gunpowder. There are literally dozens and dozens. It has to be the acceptable powder for a 45 load and measured. You get too much, you blow up. Literally, blow up the gun, blow up in your face, and everybody knows about that. Put too little in, you get something called a squib, where it pushes the bullet into the barrel where it sticks. That's what killed Brandon Lee, was a stuck bullet. And now you've got the right amount of powder. Now to measure that powder, you need either a powder scoop of the right size, and they make dozens. So you'd say, okay, I want one for that powder for that round. And you scoop it out. That's pretty fast. That's the old way. The new way is something like what I have, and these are computer-driven perfect measures that will get within 1 grain of powder. They're computer-driven trickle chargers. They cost about $300. They're real fancy. Put in the powder, put in the exact grains of weight that you want that powder to be, press the button, and a little tiny tray fills up, and you dump it into the cartridge through a little funnel. Now you've got powder, you got primer, you got a good case. You take your bullet and you put it on the top. But you need one more tool for your press, and that is a die that fits that bullet. And so you put in the die, everything's sitting there. You pull the big lever and puts pressure straight exactly down. To push the bullet in exactly as deep as you want it to go. And after it's in there, the die that you've purchased, which is another expensive toy, presses on the outside of the case and puts what's called a crimp on it. And that case now has the bullet seated on top of the powder, the exact correct depth, which you know through measurements and books, and it squeezed real tight. Otherwise, the bullet would just fall out. Or the first time you fired the gun, the bullet would just flop out on the other cartridges. It must be crimped tight.
So, Mr. Kuski, that is an enormous amount of steps, correct?
Yes, yes.
And I appreciate that complete explanation, because would you agree that it's not sufficient to just have an inertia puller
No,
to accomplish all those steps? Okay.
it's useless.
Okay. And with all of that required for reloading, you've described the components of a live bullet. Are you also in agreement with the FBI that you cannot tell a live round from a dummy?
Yes.
With a picture?
In a picture, absolutely not.
Did you, I know in the course of your expert work, you're able to watch portions of the trial and pay
Yes.
attention. Did you see in any of the videos or any of the pictures any of this type of reloading equipment you've been talking about?
Well, I believe in Seth has a tumbler, I think I saw in the back, which is what you polish up brass with for reloading. I saw
Objection, foundation. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'm having an issue with my shoe. Pardon me.
So an objection as to foundation, but he's an expert and he can look at all of the evidence and he can see the testimony. So I mean, maybe he's got to include a question as to, like, did you review the the evidence in here? Did you review the evidence of Seth Kenny's PDQ prop and arm, place, and et cetera, the things there. Did you see any equipment that he had that was related to, reloading rounds, et cetera? So that's probably, she's probably going to tell him that he's got to jump in and kind of take the lead of this witness a little bit again. Like, again, he's a talker. He really likes to talk. He's very passionate about this subject. But the direct examiner needs to direct him.
Let me ask you on a different topic with regard to the dangers of intermixing live and dummy ammunition. Can you tell the jury if those are stored in the same place, is that potentially dangerous?
And I will object if we can approach, please.
Okay. Let's just fast forward through this.
Do you regularly, as a gun collector, gun owner, everything, do you regularly have interaction with different types of ammunition?
Yes, I do.
And does that include live ammunition and dummy ammunition?
Yes, it does.
And do you, with regard to the dummy ammunition, do you teach individuals proper gun safety?
Absolutely. I'm an NRA certified pistol instructor.
And as part of that, do you sometimes use dummy rounds in your teaching with them?
Yes, I do.
In that capacity, have you become familiar with various types of dummy ammunition?
Yes, I do.
And are you familiar with various types of live ammunition?
Yes, I am.
Do you store live ammunition, or do you have a place to store live ammunition yourself?
Yes, I do.
And do you have a place to store dummy ammunition yourself?
Yes, I do.
Are you familiar with whether there are any dangers of storing those together?
Absolutely.
And why would that be?
There are two sides of the danger. One easy to see, and that is if a live round somehow found its way in with look-alike dummy ammunition, you would have a very severe chance of having somebody getting killed. Now, the flip side is perhaps equally dangerous, though less visible. If I'm hunting Russian wild boar, which I hunt with a handgun in California, and I go to shoot at a Russian wild boar that weighs 325 pounds and it's coming right at me, and the gun goes click because I substituted a dummy, I will be the dead one. So yes, both sides are bad.
Absolutely. And with
But on the
regard to
film,
your
that's
storage of
really
ammunition, is it important to have an inventory system?
Yes, I have a inventory system for all my ammunition, all my powder, all of my reloading, which goes into dozens of different kinds of rounds.
And in the course of your reloading, did you become aware that in 2021 timeframe, was it difficult to purchase primers?
Yes, we called the great ammo shortage, and there was, for a variety of reasons, a huge run on ammunition. You couldn't get primers to reload. You know, they just didn't happen. You couldn't get them. You go to the store, you couldn't get them. You couldn't get even 9mm ammo. You couldn't get almost anything. The store shelves were emptied out. People were hoarding powder. Even my long-range rifle stuff, I couldn't get powder. So yes, that's called the great ammo shortage, and to a certain extent, it still goes on.
Now, during your course as an expert, in this case, you heard Mr. Haig's testimony. Do you agree with his conclusion that the live rounds found on set were reloads?
Yeah, well, hand loads. A
Hand loads.
reload means that it's an old case reloaded. He was very
Objection. Let's approach.
Let me listen to that again.
well.
Agree with
Great ammo shortage, and to a certain extent, it still goes on.
Now, during your course as an expert, in this case, you heard Mr. Haig's testimony. Do you agree with his conclusion that the live rounds found on set were reloads?
Yeah, well, hand loads.
Hand
A
loads.
reload means that it's an old case reloaded. He was very
Objection. Let's approach.
Is it misstating testimony? Is that what the objection is?
Mr. Kuski, is it your opinion that from your viewing them, that the live rounds on set were reloads or hand loads?
yes, it is.
And would you explain what you saw, the quality, were they lower quality in your opinion?
Lower quality than what?
In terms of like a store-bought round from a major manufacturer or something like that, or do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I believe they were less consistent than that of a major manufacturer. Meaning, and I can expound on that if you wish.
Yes.
Okay. When you get
I'm going to object again. Let's approach.
Everybody looks frustrated. The witness just laughed. Bowles just laughed. Sometimes when there's just so many objections, it can start to backfire.
Okay, Mr. Kuski, so your opinion is that these are hand loads?
correct.
Okay. Now, you understand also as an expert in reviewing the information in this case, there are a variety of different types of dummy rounds on set? There were a variety?
Yes.
Okay. And did that include some that rattled, some that did not rattle, and some with a hole in the side?
Yes.
Okay. Did you also review evidence in this case of Mr. Baldwin not only being dangerous at the time of the actual tragic shooting, but dangerous at other times on set?
Objection.
He's just like, I don't want to. This is getting tedious.
Okay, sir, my full question was going to be, did you see evidence that Mr. Baldwin was not safe with firearms after there was a yell of cut in a particular scene and he shot a blank after that scene?
Right.
Yes, I feel that's unsafe.
Real quick, John O'Rourke, thanks for the super chat. Backfire for whom though? Both parties? Well, if every time he's coming back and he's like, okay, well, like I asked before, let's get an answer to this question. That means that he won the objection. And if she keeps objecting like that and interrupting like that and not winning on the objections, that can start to backfire, because it can backfire on her, because it can look like she's just trying to interrupt the testimony. And people, I mean, it to me, at least, it's interesting what he's trying to say. I'm trying to listen to what he's trying to say, and it does feel a little bit frustrating at a certain point, because it's like, really, was there something objectionable about that? So yeah. Oh, and also, sorry, a question here too. I'm trying to find it here. And if these are deemed to be bad objections, can the judge comment on that / say to stop wasting the court's time with the bad objections? No, I mean, I don't know. I suppose so, but not really. Not really. I mean, it really is just, it's going to end up hurting your side if you over object.
One further question. Are you familiar with the period weapon called a Henry rifle?
Yes, I am.
Are you familiar whether if that is loaded or unloaded at the bottom of that rifle, whether somebody could see whether there was rounds at the bottom of it if they're just looking?
Yes, a Henry, may I go into
Yes.
detail? A Henry rifle is a predecessor to the Winchester. Mr. Henry actually invented the Winchester. It is a rifle with a very long barrel, doesn't have a handguard under, which was a problem. It's loaded from the top in a kind of a weird way, and the ammunition, the cartridges are dropped into a long tube where a spring pushes them down. One of the biggest disadvantages, and this was in the Civil War, is it has a long open side on it, beneath the barrel, where you can actually look in and see all the loaded cartridges. Now, they thought that was a really good deal until they got in the mud of the trenches and the cartridges were all jammed. Right now, if you look at a Henry, anybody who knows anything about Henrys looks at that Henry and says the whole side's open and you can see ammunition in there, dummies, whatever. And if you don't have that, they're going to be laughing because it looks like an empty rifle.
Yeah, his explanation.
Finally, sir, the last question.
So he does talk a lot, and he does try to just like keep talking, because he seems like he's very passionate about it. But he's also very knowledgeable, and he's also very engaging with the jury. The way that he's using his full body language to show what he's talking about and to engage with them, turning to them to talk, and it's not in a way that's like, I'm getting a question, I'm giving an answer. I'm getting a question, I'm giving an answer. It's not like that. He is a very engaging sort of speaker and very knowledgeable, clearly. So if the jury can get beyond that first feeling of, oh dear God, from the beginning, maybe this will be okay. Because like I said, he is very, very, very knowledgeable.
Ask you with regard to there was some criticism in the trial. One point of Miss Gutierrez-Reed holding a shotgun with it pointed in front of her. And is there, do you have an opinion on that with regard to, for example, military drill?
Yes, I do.
Objection.
Okay, fast forward through more sidebar.
So I'm yet another objection, withdraw that question. And that's all the questions I have.
Cross-exam.
Oh boy.
Mr. Kuski, do you agree with me that basic gun safety requires that the handler of the gun not point the gun at anyone?
If it's a real gun, yes.
Do you agree with me that while you were sitting here in the courtroom, you pulled out a gun and you pointed it at the judge?
I do not.
You disagree?
I pointed the gun into this space up here, never directly at the judge.
Do you agree that basic gun safety requires that you keep the muzzle of the gun pointed down for safety?
Not at all. A gun may be pointed, as any hunter education class like I taught, maybe pointed up, maybe pointed back, maybe pointed cross arms, as in the military, maybe pointed at the ground, maybe put in something like a military stance, such as order arms with the butt on the ground and the piece right under your arm. So no. And to further, in a cross draw or any of the...
No, I'm not talking about a cross draw. Thank you. Do you agree that when you pulled that firearm out and pointed it in the direction of the judge, the deputy standing next to you had to intervene and grab the gun and point it down?
I want to object.
She doesn't need to go there. She doesn't need to. Everybody saw it. Everybody reacted. Like, you know, his answer was actually correct. Oh, what was that? What did he? I mean, we can't hear what he said, but he seems angry. I mean, obviously, understandably. I mean, because she's going in and trying to put him off balance. That's also part of the game here. But the problem is, if there are people who are already off put by her, they're not gonna like this. I mean, he's a very...
Mr. Kuski,
So sorry. He's a very sympathetic witness here. You know, like despite that first flub, which was, I mean, I'm the first one to say that was horrifying to watch. But to rub his nose in that moment even further is, I don't know. He seems like such a kind old man, and I don't know. Granted, defense has done similar tactics on their own with the civil litigation stuff also. And so how somebody reacts to that, how a witness reacts to that is likely to impact how people see, you know, that treatment. But you know, people are gonna react in different ways to this. People are gonna maybe get defensive of him, maybe feel like, I mean, hell yeah, you made me fear for my life, you know? So I don't know. She doesn't need to go there is the thing, because like I said, everybody saw it. Everybody felt what they felt. You don't need to take that extra step. Other than maybe she's thinking, I want to throw him off balance so that he gets angry, so that he gives me, you know, he makes a mistake in what he says to me on cross-examination.
have you ever been qualified as an expert in firearms safety in a court of law?
No.
Have you ever worked on criminal cases before?
Yes, I have.
Have all of the cases that the criminal cases that you've worked on, has Mr. Bowles been the attorney in all of them?
Not at all.
Not at all?
No.
Give me a moment, please. Let me clarify my question. Have you worked on criminal cases related to the securities industry?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Other than, and you're an investment banker, correct?
Not exactly, but sufficient name for it.
Okay. And other than working on criminal cases having to do with securities, do you agree with me that the only other types of criminal cases you've worked on have all involved Mr. Bowles.
I do not.
Isn't it true, sir, that you provided a pretrial interview in this case on November 29th, 2023?
Yes.
And isn't it true that during that interview, my investigator, Mr. Rice, asked you, is Mr. Bowles the only attorney that you've worked with? And your response was, outside of the securities industry in the past, yes.
Yes, and I have worked since then, and I have worked prior to that confidentially with cases before the United States Navy and other cases which were criminal, and I believed you were speaking only of what's going on here. If you'd like to hear the other ones, I'm very happy to tell you. I worked, for example, with the Monterey Sheriffs.
Is there a question?
No, there is not a question on the table right now. You gave a lengthy description about how a person could turn a dummy round into a live round. You recall the testimony that you gave moments ago.
Yes.
I want to talk to you about doing the opposite, okay? I want to talk to you about taking a live round and turning it into a dummy round,
Okay.
okay? Do you agree with me, sir, that the first step is you would place the live round in the inertia puller and smack it so that the projectile separates and the powder comes out?
Yes.
And at that point in time, you are left with an empty casing, a projectile, a pile of gunpowder. But the problem with your casing is that it still has a live primer, right?
That's right.
So in order to make the primer inert, you can take that empty shell casing with that live primer, you can put it into a firearm and you can fire it.
Correct.
And now I've made the primer inert.
There is another way if you wish to hear.
No, I appreciate you though, but
Thank you. Yes, I agree.
You agree that what I'm saying, it can be done.
Can be done.
And then after I've fired it and I've heard the pop, knowing that the primer has now been made inert, I can take that projectile and I can just put super glue on it and stick it back into that casing.
Well, you couldn't normally without expanding the case. That's what I was talking about when you do a sizer. You could expand the case with a sizer, because what's going to happen in many cases, and I can't say every one because I've never done super glue, is it's very difficult to get a bullet into a case that hasn't been expanded and sized. You could try it. I can't guarantee it'll work.
Sure, I mean, you can take the empty shell casing and you can put it on top of a projectile and you can take your inertia puller or a hammer and just tap it down.
An inertia puller is made out of plastic. It is not for tapping anything down. But you could take a hammer, but what's very likely to happen is you'll bend the case beyond all use and recognition and it can't fall in. That's why you expand cases in the process. You could try it. I've never beat in any bullets. Some bullets are very, very hard. Some are soft. So it is possible with a soft lead bullet that you could maybe not bend your case and maybe not shave off your bullet. Possible.
And isn't it true, sir, that the live ammunition found on the set of Rust, in fact, had soft lead bullets?
I didn't measure the lead, so there's something called a
Hang on, I appreciate your response. In fact, sir, you have never actually viewed the live rounds that are in evidence. You've only seen pictures of them, isn't that correct? So you haven't taken them and looked at them, right?
No, I've taken all the pictures and looked, that's it.
Okay, but you watched the testimony of our expert, Mr. Haig.
Yes, I did.
And isn't it true that Mr. Haig testified that the projectiles from the live rounds found on the set of Rust were soft lead?
I didn't hear soft, but lead, certainly.
They weren't copper jacketed, correct?
No, not copper jacketed.
And he also testified that because they were lead, and lead is a soft metal, that's the reason that that projectile became so damaged when it went through Ms. Hutchins and into Mr. Souza.
Absolutely, that's called ballooning.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yeah, he's handling himself well on cross.
You testified on direct examination that you can't tell a live round from a dummy round in a photograph.
Simply in a photograph. I agree with Mr. Haig, who said the same thing.
Okay, sorry guys. This has happened now twice. Um okay. Let me get this set up again. I'm so sorry. This is just internet issues. We've been doing so well without the internet giving us troubles up until today. Okay, don't worry. Don't worry. I paused it once I saw and I went back a little bit. I'm going to go just a tiny bit more here. And I think this should be where we left off with the testimony.
You testified on direct examination that you can't tell a live round from a dummy round in a photograph.
Simply in a photograph. I agree with Mr. Haig, who said the same thing.
Well, do you agree with me that you can tell a live round from a dummy round in a photograph if that dummy round has a hole drilled into the casing so it can't have any gunpowder?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you, sir. And in your review of the case materials, sir, you understand that live ammunition from PDQ Props was sent to the FBI, and it was determined to be substantially different than the live rounds found on the set of Rust.
I do.
You gave an opinion earlier that you believe that the live rounds were hand loads.
Yes,
you recall
I do.
that?
Yes.
And I just want to be clear, you're giving that opinion just from looking at photographs, not from going to the evidence room, taking the evidence, handling it in the way that Mr. Haig did.
Yes.
All
and,
right.
and from Mr. Haig's testimony as well.
Okay. I'll pass the witness.
Yeah, I don't have any follow-up questions.
No redirect. That's a power
This
move.
witness is excused. Thank you.
May help me with these. And the next. And my hammer.
Putting all this stuff together. Meanwhile, we've got the poll results. So guilty is 52% so far. Not guilty is 26%. And 20% say it's too soon. All right. I think he recovered that one. Maybe not entirely. It's hard to recover entirely everything from something like that. If he hadn't had that early mishap, that would have been a stellar witness through and through. But I think that did end on a high note for the defense with that witness. Okay, and we're back again. So sorry, guys. Oh, this is really, really frustrating. Okay, let me pull up the screen one more time. Whoops, wrong one. Okay, here we go. And this is the end of.
Going to,
Okay.
all right, Jerry, we're going to finish for the day.
She knows I'm having internet
You can
problems.
expect closing arguments to commence tomorrow morning, not
Oh.
right away. The defense is still putting on their case, but when the defense is finished, then we will do closing arguments, and they anticipate that it will be sometime in the morning that we will get to closing arguments, okay? So please don't talk among yourselves or anyone else about the evidence received here in court. Don't do any
Okay.
research or online Googling about the rest production or this trial. Thank you. We'll see you at 8:30.
Okay, so here we have it. So tomorrow we are going to be expecting to have closing arguments. I thought that that her dad was maybe going to testify today. That Thel Reed was maybe going to testify today because there was that NBC reporter said that he was spotted in the hallway. Maybe he's just there to support. If they are anticipating going to closing arguments tomorrow tomorrow morning, I don't think Hannah's going to be testifying because I think if she testified, it would be a very long direct and cross and redirect. Her testimony would just take a very long time. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be her. Maybe Thel Reed will testify tomorrow. Maybe it'll be one more expert witness. I'm not entirely sure because I do recall that they also were planning to have some kind of a film director or something to testify as an expert as well. I'm not sure. So anyhow, interesting. So we are ending an hour early. I mean, honestly, like I'm a little grateful because my internet is wonking out. But let's get some questions before we go. All right. So let's see here. Jerry Roth, are witness is supposed to say, I do, when asked to tell the truth. I have heard yes, yeah, sure. And this is the first one who said, I do. I mean, generally speaking, assenting to it is sufficient. Dusty Ham question, can they revoke his expert status after showing such a blatant disregard for safety? No. No, but they can, you know, try to make him look like an idiot, as she did on cross-examination. Uh, English bottle cap, can Alec Baldwin object if he gets the same judge? I mean, defense teams can always try to get a judge, you know, taken off their particular case. I don't see why they would need to for this one. She's not overly biased. I know some folks in the chat have mentioned um mentioned some rumblings about, like, maybe she's biased. I don't think she is. I don't have that impression myself. Stephen Horton, 8:30 tomorrow. That a usual 9 a.m. start. Yeah. So normally they were starting at 9 a.m. Well, kind of. They were realistically getting started at like 8:45 or like 8:50. Um, but we typically were going live at 9. Um, but she also, keep in mind that she also was telling the jury to be there at 8:30. So that is earlier than when they're actually going to be starting the testimony, because obviously they need the jury to be there in the room before they can start. Daniel Evans question, do you think they'll call any of the camera crew that quit, or do you think none of them will be called because it's bad for both sides? I mean, the fact that safety issues were part of it, it might give them an opportunity to explain their concerns and frustrations and all that about, firearms on set. That I wouldn't necessarily advise to call them as witnesses. Hobbs, what are the implications of a hung jury? So a hung jury means that the judge ends up declaring it a mistrial, meaning that there's no final decision on the case. And that means that it's up to the prosecution to decide whether they want to recharge her. So they can decide to recharge. They can decide to just drop the case and walk away, and that is a decision on their part that has a number of factors, to include the state resources, the availability of different witnesses, um, as well as, like, do they think that they can make some changes the second time around that can get them that win. So that's the big implications and so forth. Thank you so much for becoming a YouTube member. Welcome to Bite Club. Thanks so much for joining, and I'm very happy to have you here. John O'Rourke, thanks for the super chat. Had this expert testified before in court? I missed the beginning. Funny business. I don't know. I don't think he hadn't testified as an expert before. That was something that came out on cross-examination. So yeah, no, I don't think he's ever testified in any capacity if he hasn't testified as an expert. Part of it, I wonder what the preparation was for this witness for his testimony, because the attorney Bowles, he could have, probably should have gone through the steps of, like, this is kind of what to expect for your the procedure for your testimony, not telling him like what to say. This is what we want you to say. None of that, but saying, like, okay, so I'm gonna call you in. We're gonna qualify you as an expert. I'm gonna ask you a bunch of questions about your background so that we can do that. Then I'm gonna ask you to bring out the firearms. It's paramount that everyone in the room feel absolutely safe with bringing these things out in the open. You have knowledge about these firearms. They don't. We're going to have to go through this step by step to make sure that everybody's on the same page, with you as to, like, what they can possibly expect from these firearms. So maybe he didn't think that he was going to need to go through in exactly that much detail with him. But I don't know, maybe they should have gone over that a little bit more. Um, but yeah. So that is that. Let me see if there are any other questions here. Okay. think that's about it. I don't see any other questions that I missed. Just looking through a little bit longer. Okay. I think that's about it. So thank you guys so much for joining and for being on this wild journey with me as we watch this trial and try to figure out, you know, what the jury might end up concluding in this case. I really am split. I don't know what the jury's going to do. I know what I think, but I know that there are multiple ways of looking at this, multiple very reasonable ways of looking at this. So I really can't give any kind of a prediction as to where the jury is and what they're gonna decide on this one. This is it's a very gray case. I mean, that tends to be the case for any trial, any case that goes all the way to trial, whether it's civil or criminal. Okay, guys. That really is probably my cue to wrap it up, right? um, anyhow, it's a gray case. It's gonna stay gray until we end up getting a verdict. Okay, with that, no more opportunities for my internet to crap out on me. I'm gonna let you guys go. Thanks so much for joining me. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to the mods. Thank you to everybody who super chatted and joined as memberships and or joined as members. All that great stuff. Thank you guys, and I will see you tomorrow for day 10 of this trial, and I guess where we wrap it up. So please, if you've got the time, come and join me tomorrow morning, New Mexico time, and we'll see what results in this case. I really don't know. Okay, thank you guys.